Antisemitism in the UK. I was raised to believe the Holocaust was an unimaginable evil, to torture, experiment upon, degrade and exterminate millions of people because of nothing but their religion and ethnicity. I would hope that any civilized listener would understand that splitting people up, segregating them, excluding from society, torturing and murdering them because of their characteristics is fundamentally wrong. When you judge a race purely for being from that race, you are on a path to do wrong. This belief should be the foundation of why we disapprove of racism. One of my earliest memories is watching a video of experiments on concentration camp inmates, aired in 1984, late at night when I was a child, around the D-Day commemorations. It shaped my disgust at anti-Semitism. This is where dehumanizing people leads. I've walked through the gates of Auschwitz. I've seen the fragments of bone in the soil around Birkenau. I've stood in the cell where Maximilian Kolbe was stood to death. I've been to Anne Frank's house where she hid. The Holocaust is a stain on humanity. I find a slight macabre fascination with just how evil humanity can be. I've always wanted to see the killing fields of the Khmer Rouge, ever since seeing the film The Killing Fields and reading Francois Bizot's book The Gate. You can't turn away from such evil, you have to admit it, record it, remember it and prevent it. I've heard some people hint at the German people somehow being particularly bad, as evidenced by the Nazi regime. But that's not what shocks me about the Holocaust and about the Nazis. I've worked with Germans, I've travelled in Germany, I've considered several of them to be good friends. What shocks me about the atrocities that were committed is that the lesson I take from that is that in the right circumstances, pretty much any nation could do this. It might not be as organised as the Germans, they won't have as many lists, but the potential evil is there in the human soul. We like to think of ourselves as civilized. Modern society judges, castigates and cancels previous generations for not being as enlightened as us. Last year I went to the Petrie Museum and was treated to a 10-minute talk on how he'd accepted money for measuring heads so that those studying phrenology would have some data. Well, we laugh at the idea that measuring the forehead can tell you the character of a human. But it was a mainstream edge science at the time, a bit like today's craze for pronouns or Instagram influencers offering their health treatments. I walked out from that museum into a London echoing to the cries of From the River to the Sea. We all know that if you remove the Jews from the River Jordan to the Mediterranean, you are either proposing ethnically cleansing millions of people from a land or murdering them. You can't free Israel from the river to the sea of Jews without murdering them. And maybe you might not think about that when you shout it, but it doesn't take much reflection to realise it is a call for genocide or ethnic cleansing. It's a call for what they tried to do in the Balkans. And the last time I remember, we considered that inappropriate. When Hamas attacked Israel out of the blue and murdered and kidnapped, randomly committing atrocities too heinous for the BBC and much of the mainstream media to describe or even mention, there were marches against Israel's reply. These started before a single shot was fired in Gaza. If I was to march the streets, accusing a woman of not being raped and suggesting she should be killed, before the man was even charged, I think it fair to say I would have ulterior motives and I would be treated harshly. This was not about Muslims being killed. Otherwise we would have seen marches for the Uyghurs in China, the atrocities in Myanmar, the slaughter in Yemen, or a dozen other conflicts, yet there is no interest in these. Nobody wants to know or talk about, no one marches. As Christmas Eve in Germany tells us, the Sunni versus Shiite conflict is far too complicated for the media to explain it to the plebs. It's easier to blame the far right. Well, people have openly denied that the 7th of October attacks even happened. People have praised them. People have promoted a prescribed terrorist organisation. When 3 girls were caught celebrating the attacks with paraglider stickers on their backs, the Muslim judge said, quote, "Your lesson has been well learned. I do not find you were seeking to show any support for Hamas." And he decided, and I quote again, decided not to punish. The lesson I learned from this is you can glorify murder by a prescribed terrorist organisation if you want to. People have called for deaths. People have spread misinformation. The media has quoted Hamas figures as facts. Even when the United Nations had to admit that half of the deaths were false, most media didn't change a single figure. 2 Labour ministers almost lost their seat to single subject candidates campaigning purely upon deaths of Muslims in Gaza. No mention of the thousands subjected to you-know-what gangs in the UK in their constituencies, or the hundreds of thousands of Muslims killed in Muslim versus Muslim conflicts. I've watched the Metropolitan Police escort a man holding an Islamic flag while making the Hamas terrorist salute past a supposed far-right demonstration in Trafalgar Square. Why would the police do this? Because they know that the supposed far-right have far less time for anti-Semitism than those who protect us? I've seen Tommy Robinson arrested for having breakfast in London on a day that he wanted to protest against anti-Semitism. I've seen security raised about synagogues. I've seen attacks on Jews not receive firm sentences. People driving cars around London, playing over the loudspeaker, "Kill the Jews, rape their daughters." Well, there's no way to identify who drives the car. So if I speed, I have to explain who's driving the car, but if I incite rape and murder, I don't. Stand on your doorstep wearing a kippah. Well, that's inciting the crowd as you are looking obviously Jewish. Hold a sign stating that Hamas are terrorists. Well, you'll be arrested for stating the law signed by Parliament and the list of prescribed organisations signed off by the Home Secretary. To tell the truth is a crime, but to train the police on the law is impossible. It's an opinion, they say. No, it's not. It's the law. Why do we have laws if the police, judiciary and media choose who they apply to? Why are the Jews not protected by these laws? Project from river to the sea onto Parliament and the police look the other way. Play videos of the Jewish hostages on a screen on the back of a van and the police pull you over and threaten to arrest you on the spot. The Prime Minister can't even get the word hostages out of his mouth. It's so hard. 9% of 18 to 24-year-olds have a favourable view of Hamas, according to YouGov polling. Jews are more than 12 times more likely to be targets of hate crime than any other faith group. 59% of the British public would be less likely to visit a city centre if they knew that a large-scale Palestine march was due to happen. We see gays for Palestine marching like turkeys looking forward to Christmas Day. The oldest hatred is alive and prospering in Britain. Yet we, the enlightened generation who know everything our dumb forefathers did not, have stood silent as anti-Semitism has grown and festered in the UK. As anti-Semitism grows, the politicians only want to talk about Islamophobia. How does Islamophobia differ from any form of racism. If I hate you because you're Buddhist, it is racism. If I hurt you or threaten you because you are Hindu, it is a crime and aggravating racism. If I say you have guilt because you are white, it is racism. There's a Family Guy joke where the police use a collar swatch to estimate whether Peter is a terrorist. It's funny because the sad truth is that in our age, where we're obsessed with racism and bigotry, that we don't apply rules evenly. And it does cut both ways. Is the sad truth that Jews are too white for society to offer them the protection expected by everyone else? For generations we argued for equality. Martin Luther King dreamt of a world where his children were judged for the colour of their character, not their skin. With the triumph of equity over equality, we have abandoned the Jews and stood aside as hate is preached on our streets. The Jews returned to England in 1655, and let's face it, they've faced bigotry and prejudice ever since. But they've contributed to society. We often say diversity is our strength. As a Christian, for me, we're a lesser country for our weakness, and we are less civilised than our parents who understood what they had to do to fight such evils. And toleration of anti-Semitism shows the lie that we're so damned civilised.